Magandang gabi po sa inyong lahat. Ito po ang inyong katipon na si Butch Valdes. Andito na naman po tayo dito sa ating programang ang Ating Katipunan. Ang Ating Katipunan po is also being, it is being produced and here in our studio dito po sa Katipunan Channel. At pero nakahook up po tayo dito sa DZXL kasi ang ating pong mga programa was always held from DZXL at that time. Pero dahil meron po tayong COVID virus, sila na po ang humuhook up sa atin ngayon. No? Okay, dito po tayo sa Katipunan Channel. Tonight, meron po akong gustong i-umpisahan para sa atin dahil nagkaroon po ng there is an ongoing international conference right now. Started yesterday and will finish today or this afternoon or early morning Philippine time. It will start. The second day will start 10 p.m. Philippine time today and it lasts up to early morning dahil nandun po sila sa East Coast. No? But this is very important kanya po minamarapat namin na ilabas at i-introduce sa ating mga listeners not just here in the Philippines but worldwide that our organization, the International LaRouche Organization, in conjunction with the Schiller Institute, ito pong parang research and think tank ng LaRouche Organization, has started a international conference, pero an online international conference. And this is covering quite a vast area of the world because the speakers of this, don't worry, we will not be presenting all of the speakers, but the speakers of this are coming from different countries. Meron po, ito po mga speakers nito, mga dalubhasang tao from France, from Russia, from Italy, all in their different levels of expertise, from finance, economics, science, at even politics. No? Meron po tayong yan. And we have also dignitaries like ambassadors. Meron pong ambassador of China to the United States who will also give a talk at meron po din mga ibang mga Russian experts on finance and economics. Mataas din na level siya at iba pa. But ang keynote nito will be magki-keynote nito will be Mrs. Helga Zepp LaRouche. Alam niyo po si Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, who heads this international organization, has sadly passed away about a year ago, February 2019. What is quite evident is that everything that Mr. Lyndon LaRouche has been saying practically throughout his whole life and all the way up to the end of his life started, and what he was warning us about actually started coming up this year in 2020. But I will let the conference speakers to explain this. So for a few minutes, bear with me. Pilitin niyo po kung pwede, na wag po niyo kaming iwanan dahil sa akin po, I want to share this with you because you must understand where we are coming from. Where is the kind of ideas of KDP are coming from? Where the Philippine LaRouche Society is our own organization or Save the Nation movement, 10 pinanggagalingan. 10 ang hugot nito, ang tawag nga nila. No? At sa aking palagay, para maunawaan nyo po, dito po, ang maririnig nyo po, lalo na kay Mrs. Helga Zepp-LaRouche, maririnig nyo po yung parang basehan ng mga tamang pag-iisip na binuksan po sa amin nitong LaRouche Organization para makita po ng tayo po, malunawaan natin, makita natin yung kakaiba ng pag-iisip. Meron pong mga pag-iisip coming from different philosophers of this direction and another that is of that direction. But whatever it is, nagkakaiba-ibang konting in terms of details at presentation, magugulat po kayo. Lahat po ng thinkers, philosophers, na mapag-isipan nyo, we can categorize them into basically 2. One level of philosophers connects human beings to the creator of the universe. The other kind of thinking, philosophers then, does not connect that. It refers to human beings as mere animals, as mere a little bit intelligent animals. Nevertheless, animals pa rin that are governed by instincts like survival of the fittest and matira matibay, ganyan ang instincts ng ibang klaseng philosopher. Yung ganito naman philosopher ang sinasabi, hindi. The human being is a unique creature that stands above all other creatures, that emphasizes the uniqueness and has the capability of what you call creativity. Creativity po, yun yung nakakapag-imagine tayo, nakakaisip tayo ng abstract, nakakaisip tayo ng sublime ideas like good or goodness or virtue, yung mga ganyan. Meron po tayong kakayanan mag-isip ng ganyan. Wala pong hayop na may kakayanan ganyan. Not only do they have creativity, human beings also have reason. No? Reason, not just the logic part, no? But understanding all principles that govern the whole of the universe to the extent that we have already discovered, nakakabigay po sa atin ng kakayanan na walang ibang creature in this world has. Kanya po tayo dito sa Katipunan Demokratikong Pilipino, maski po parang politika or about certain things and governance, meron pong underlying principle na pinaguhugutan ito. Yung underlying principle na nagbibigay ng motivation, nagbibigay po ng hindi lang motivation, ng kakayanan para isulong ang itong mga prinsipyong to nakatutok sa kabutihan ng mamamayan at kabutihan ng sangkatauhan. I don't know if it is difficult, but I ask you and I beg you to join us that in this initiation of the conference, we will play just the beginning part of the conference and also play the message of Helga Zapp-LaRouche para mabigyan po tayo ng konting flavor as to what the conference is about. At maybe a little later on, if we have time, yung pong aking participation dito sa conference. Kasi nagbigay din po tayo ng pahayag hinggil dito sa ating sitwasyon sa Pilipinas. So bear with me and let's ask Mr. Dennis Speed. Yung po ang kanyang pangalan. Siya po ang moderator nitong international conference. I think it's the first of its kind being held by the Schiller Institute.
Hello, my name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the Schiller Institute, I want to welcome everyone today to today's conference. It's being broadcast all over the world. Our conference is being translated into many languages: Spanish, Chinese, German, French, Italian. And we welcome our international audience and thank the translators very much.
My name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the Schiller Institute, I want to welcome everyone today to today's conference. It's being broadcast all over the world. Our conference is being translated into many languages:
and announce our
Spanish, Chinese, German, French,
panel,
Italian.
which is called the
We
urgent
welcome
need
our international
to replace
audience and thank the
geopolitics.
translators very much. My name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the Schiller Institute, I want to
Our
welcome.
first and keynote speaker will be Helga Zapp-LaRouche, the founder and chairman of Schiller Institute. His Excellency, Mr. Dmitry Polyansky, First Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of the Russian Federation to the United Nations. Ambassador Huang Peng, Consul General of the People's Republic of China in New York. As well, Counselor Zhou Gaolin, Head of the Science and Technology Section of the
Mr.
Consulate
Dmitry
General
Polyansky,
of the People's
First
Republic
Deputy
of China in
Permanent
New York.
Representative of the Permanent
Jacques
Mission of the
Cheminade,
Russian Federation to the
Chairman
United
of
Nations.
Solidarity and Progress,
Ambassador
former
Huang
French
Peng,
presidential candidate,
Consul General
and
of the
Professor
People's
Michele
Republic of
Garacci,
China in New
an
York.
economist from Italy.
As well, Counselor Zhou Gaolin, Head of the Science and Technology Section of the Consulate General.
75 years ago today, April 25th, 1945, Russian and American troops met at the Elbe River in Germany. This signaled the end of the Second World War in Europe. The post-war world, as envisioned by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, was a world that would be free of British and other colonial rule. But that was not to be. Roosevelt's death on April 12, 1945, allowed the British and other imperial powers to downshift history. From 1945, Lyndon LaRouche, a veteran of the Second World War, vowed that, in the words of the poet Friedrich Schiller, "A purpose which higher reason hath conceived, which men's afflictions urge, 10,000 times defeated, may never be abandoned." Lyndon LaRouche's post-war experience in witnessing the Indian independence movement gripped him. He decided to commit his life to achieving that FDR dream of a world free of colonialism. But Lyndon LaRouche also realized that to end imperial rule, what Winston Churchill had once called the empire of the mind must be defeated. LaRouche regarded Lord Bertrand Russell's idea of scientific method to be as evil as were his ideas about society and humanity. Russell espoused ideas like this: if a Black Death could be spread throughout the world once in every generation, survivors could procreate freely without making the world too full. LaRouche, opposing such a Malthusian view, wrote hundreds of documents over 5 decades that proved that there were no limits to growth. Limits were only in the human mind. Alexander Hamilton's design of the United States Treasury's power to issue public credit for investment in the nation's physical improvement expressed the same outlook. In 1985, Lyndon LaRouche produced a report entitled Economic Breakdown and the threat of global pandemics. This forecast that the Malthusian financial policies of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund would lower the resistance of populations worldwide, leading to pandemics and the deaths of millions. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, a LaRouche dialogue with many nations to avoid and avert that disaster, and most notably China, resulted in the issuance of this report, the Eurasian Land Bridge, the New Silk Road. Helga Sepp LaRouche visited several nations on behalf of this proposal, and it was a diplomacy of development, not geopolitics. In a public talk in 1997, LaRouche made these remarks regarding why China and the United States are natural allies in the pursuit of world economic development.
The Congress does not represent the United States. They're not quite sure who they do represent these days, since they haven't visited their voters recently. The President is institutionally the embodiment of the United States in international relations. The State Department can't do that. The Justice Department can't do it. No other department can do it. Only the President of the United States under our Constitution can represent the United States as an entity. Its entire personality, its true interest, its whole people. Now, there's only one other power on this planet which can be so insolent as that toward other powers, and that's the Republic of China. Now, China is engaged presently in a great infrastructure building project in which my wife and others have had an ongoing engagement over some years. There's a great reform in China, which is a troubled reform. They're trying to solve a problem. That doesn't mean there is no problem. But they're trying to solve it. Therefore, if the United States, so the President of the United States and China, participate in fostering that project, sometimes called the Silk Road Project, sometimes the Land Bridge Project, if that project of developing development corridors across Eurasia, into Africa, into North America, is extended, that project is enough work to put this whole planet into an economic revival. So that what we have here is a set of projects which are not just transportation projects like the transcontinental railroads of the United States, which was the precedent for this idea back in the late 1860s and 1870s. But you have development corridors where you develop on an area of 50 to 70 kilometers either side of your rail link, your pipeline, so forth. You develop this area with industry, with mining, with all these kinds of things, which is the way you pay for a transportation link. Because of all the rich economic activity, every few kilometers of distance along this link, there's something going on, some economic activity. People working, people building things, people doing things. To transform this planet in great projects of infrastructure building, which will give you the great industries, the new agriculture, and the other things we desperately need. There is no need for anybody on this planet who's able to work to be out of work. That's simple. And that project is the means. If the nations which agree with China, which now includes Russia, Iran, India, other nations, if they engage in a commitment to that project, which they're building every day, if the United States, that is the President of the United States, Clinton, continues to support that effort as he's been doing, at least politically, then what do you have? You have the United States and China and a bunch of other countries ganged up together against the greatest power on this planet, which is the British Empire, called the British Commonwealth. That's the enemy. And if on one bright day, say a Sunday morning after a weekend meeting, the President of the United States, the President of China, and a few other people say, we have determined this weekend, based on our advisors and the facts, that the international financial and monetary system is hopelessly bankrupt. And we, in our responsibility as heads of state, must put these bankrupt institutions into bankruptcy reorganization in the public interest. And it is in our interest to cooperate as nations in doing this, to avoid creating chaos on this planet. The result then is that such an announcement on a bright Sunday morning will certainly spin the talking heads on Washington TV.
LaRouche's view of China from 23 years ago has much to teach us today. Here is another excerpt from a speech 10 years after what you've just seen, which was done in 2007, describing the LaRouche proposal for a new international monetary system.
Is we have to create a new monetary system, and what I've proposed is this, that if the United States, and this is not impossible, if the United States should extend a proposal to Russia, to China, and to India to co-sponsor the formation of a new international monetary financial order, that could be done. The problem is that most nations, as such as those of Western and Central Europe and other parts of the world, are not able to independently act in this way, to initiate. However, if you get the United States and Russia, which are two of the largest nations of the developed world, formerly developed world, and you combine that with China and India, which are the two Asian nations which represent the largest ration of population of the world's population, then you have a combination which can provide a protective cover for joint action together with the nations of South America, for example, and Europe and elsewhere. We have now an incalculable crisis worldwide in progress. This is not a financial crisis. This is not a financial scandal as such. This is not a scandal of any ordinary sense. This is a crisis to see who is going to run the world. Is it going to be a group of nations, or is it going to be the emerging new British Empire, or the re-emergent British Empire, which really never went away, which takes over from the United States and establishes its world rule through globalization? Therefore, what we have to do is this. The present world international monetary financial system is bankrupt. There is no way in which it could be reformed on its own terms and survive. Any attempt to maintain this system would mean a complete disintegration into a new dark age comparable to what Europe experienced during the 14th century, with the collapse of some of the Lombard banks in Italy at that time. That's what happened. Therefore, the solution is to establish a new international monetary financial system. That can be done on the basis of the U.S. Constitution's special provisions. Remember, the U.S. system is not a monetarist system. The U.S. system constitutionally is based on a credit system based on the constitutional authority of the United States government over the control, utterance and control of its own money. In other parts of the world, countries' financial systems have been controlled largely under the Anglo-Dutch liberal system, in which this system, through its network of private banks, so-called central banks, actually dictates and controls governments. So we've had an imperial world monetary financial system which has been traditionally centered on the British Empire, essentially ever since 1763, February 1763. Against that, the only system which is surviving of any great significance today as the alternative is the constitutional provisions of the U.S. Constitution, which establishes the U.S. dollar as a credit mechanism of the U.S. government. That is, under our system, when it's operating, and it has not always operated that way, obviously, under our system, we generate credit through a vote in the Congress, especially the House of Representatives. The President of the United States then acts upon that authority of this federal law to utter currency as credit against the United States itself. Now, the chief function of this credit is not just to print money. The function of this credit is to supply capital funds for long-term capital investments, especially in the public sector, but spilling over into the private sector in the public sector, large-scale infrastructure projects for the states as well as the federal government. This credit generally extends for a life period of 25 to 50 years in terms of modern economy. Therefore, we have a present world monetary financial system which does not function. However, if the United States affirms its constitution and enters into agreement with 3 other sponsoring major countries and other countries, then we can create a new international monetary financial system immediately, putting the entire existing system into bankruptcy reorganization to maintain the continuity of essential functions and to start a program of actual net economic growth and development. The hard core of this, or the long-term, would be long-term investment in basic economic infrastructure and development of the economies of various parts of the world. A cooperative set of treaty agreements of 25 to 50 years duration to create capital formation to bring the world up in the way that Roosevelt had intended had he lived at the end of the war. Therefore, the United States must be reformed in the way consistent with its own constitution by offering cooperation with other countries, especially leading countries, to establish a new world system, a new version of the old Bretton Woods system, which would provide for a recovery programs of over 25 to 50 years of long-term investment throughout the world as a whole.
Now, 13 years later, Lyndon LaRouche's vision for the United States and for the world must become a reality. We all over the world stand simultaneously on the precipice both of disaster and of the greatest potential in human history. Hello.
Okay, yun po ang ating napakinggan na parang introduction. No? Inumpisahan po ni Dennis Speed at ang ginawa po niya ay he came up with very important statements coming from Lyndon LaRouche. At kung makikita niyo po ang dates ng mga statements ni Mr. Lyndon LaRouche, ang mga iba dating 1997, yung isa 2007, no? And already he was talking about the crisis. Already he was talking about the crisis that not just for the United States, but for the rest of the world. No? And that ang sinasabi niya, kinakailangan daw palitan yung sistemang pananalapi. Kasi po ang ating sistemang pananalapi based on pautang. Pautang, ito pong ginagawa natin ngayon. Pumupunta tayo sa mga bangko sa labas at nagkakaroon tayo ng foreign debt. At sila, yung pinagkakautangan natin, ganyan na rin ang buong mundo, sila ang nagkakaroon ng kapangyarihan sa inyong sa ating ekonomiya, no? At palaki ng palaki ito. Tapos nagsama-sama po yung mga financial institutions na yan at gumawa po sila ng isang sistema na tinatawag nilang global financial system na hawak nila lahat ng mga bangko sentral sa buong mundo. At ganyan po nila minamanage ang ekonomiya ng buong mundo. Sino po ba ito? These are just a few of the so-called financial elite, the money lenders of the world. And we have been in that kind of situation for such a long time. All the way up to what you're experiencing now. No? When this situation has reached that level, kasi po, alam nyo, hindi lang pautang ang nangyayari. Pumasok po tayo dito sa tinatawag nating speculation. Ano po ba yung speculation? Yung pag meron kang gusto mong umutang para magtayo ng negosyo, okay, yung bangko, papapiraman ka at tayo ka ng negosyo at babayaran mo siya buwan-buwan. Yun ang normal na negosyo ng bangko. Pero ang nangyari po dito, nung hinawakan po ng mga elitistang, mga financial oligarchy, ang buong sistemang pananalapi sa mundo, hinawakan na nila lahat ng pamamaraan para hawak nila ang pera ng buong mundo. Hindi lang sa pagpapautang, no? Kundi sa tinatawag nating spekulasyon. For example, ang gagawin nila, bababaan nila ang interest ng pagpapautang para para makautang yung mga tao, mga bangkong malalaki. Pero yung mga bangkong malalaki, hindi nila ipapautang sa negosyo. Ipapasok nila itong pera sa stock market, sa Wall Street. Kaya ang tawag natin diyang casino. Paano? Bakit? Ipapasok mo yan, bibili ka ng mga stocks na maski na walang masyadong malaking halaga, dahil bumibili ka ng stocks nila, nagpapaakyat ng halaga yung value. Dahil binibili mo, tumataas ang value ng stocks. Tapos yung mga may-ari, ibebenta nila. In other words, parang hindi talagang negosyo ang pinag-uusapan natin. Ang negosyo, hiram ka ng pera, kapital, magtayo ka ng tindahan mo, magtayo ka ng gawaan ng sapatos, gumawa ka ng sapatos, ibenta mo. Pero ito, ibang klase. Hiram ka ng pera, itaya mo dito sa stock market, sa Wall Street. Pagdating sa Wall Street, anong itataya? Paano tumataya? Bumibili ka ng stocks, bumibili ka ng mga shares of stock ng mga ibang kumpanya. Bakit mo bibilin yon? Kasi ang gagawin nila, pag bumili ka niyan, sasabihin sa'yo, tataas ang halaga niyan. Kaya bumili ka na ngayon, pag tumaas ang halaga, mabebenta mo, kikita ka. Hindi talagang negosyo ang nangyayari. Sugal. Ano po ang nangyayari? Bakit sugal? Kasi hindi palaging tumataas eh. Hindi palaging tumataas ang halaga ng mga shares of stock, no? So ano po ang mangyayari niyan? Dumadating sa panahon na wala nang nakakabili nung binebentang shares of stock. Magbebenta ngayon sila. Pagbenta nila, pababa na. Kasi nangangailangan na sila ng cash. Ang benta nila mas mababa kaysa doon sa binila nila. So, pag nag-umpisa yan, nagkakaroon ng tinatawag natin crash. Pag nag-crash yung Wall Street, alam niyo po ang Wall Street, dyan po parang naka-invest lahat ng pera ng mundo. Wala po akong alam na ekonomiya na hindi naglalagay ng investment sa Wall Street. Hindi po pang Amerikano yan, pang mga bansa. So pagdating doon at bumagsak, lugi. Pag nalugi, eto na naman. Ito na naman yung Bangko Sentral ng Amerika, Federal Reserve, magpapahiram na naman ng napakababang interest para umiram na naman yung mga ibang institusyon, mga bangko, mga kung ano-ano, para itaya na naman dito sa Wall Street. I'm trying to simplify this idea of what na sinasabi ni Mr. Lyndon LaRouche na masalimot at pabagsak kasi walang inaabutan na development yung sistemang ganyan. Kasi yung pera hindi po pumapasok sa talagang industriya, pumapasok lang sa sugal. At sabi niya, ang may hawak nitong mga ito ay yung mga elitista at yung mga bankero, mga financial elite na London-based. London-based kasi ang headquarters nila po nasa London, pero yung playground nila para dito ay nasa New York, nasa Wall Street. No? Ganyan po ang kanilang operation. Kaya kung minsan tayo, hindi nyo nalalaman sa mga nakaraan na administrasyon, yung mga pondo ng SSS, yung mga pondo ng GSIS na itinataya nila dito sa Wall Street, no? Ay nagkalugi-lugi at walang nananagot. Walang administrasyon na sumasagot dyan. Kung marunong itong pamahalaan natin ngayon, uusisain yan, i-audit yan, buhat nung panahon ni Corazon Aquino. Titignan kung sino ang kumuha, kasi ang ginagawa nila, ang ginagamit nila yung pera ng SSS tsaka GSIS para i-invest dyan, linalaro. Hindi mo pera, pero ilalaro mo. Di ba? So pag kumita, ibubulsa mo yung bahagi ng kita. Pero pag hindi kumita, tameme ka muna, hintayin mo na naman pumasok ang mga koleksyon ng SSS at GSIS. Yan po ang racket dyan. Nevertheless, balik tayo dito kay LaRouche. Ang sinasabi niya, kinakailangan palitan yung sistema. At yung sistemang yun, kung hindi natin papalitan, paano papalitan? Kinakailangan, sabi niya, alis tayo dito sa floating exchange rate system. Itong floating exchange rate, ang basa nyo, ano bang exchange rate ng peso to the dollar? 50 to 1. Bukas magiging 52 to 1. Anong gagawin mo? Magbebenta na ako ngayon ng dollar para kumita ako ng 2 piso kada dollar. O magbebenta ako ng peso para ipasok ko yung pera ko sa dollar. Depende kung saan nag-fluctuate yung exchange rate. Yung po, negosyo ba yan? Hindi po. Sa paningin po ni LaRouche, hindi negosyo yan kasi it does not produce goods. Kumikita ka nga, para kang kumikita ka sa palitan, pero it does not generate labor. It does not produce goods. Ang negosyo po, ang talagang ekonomiya, meron labor, meron production of goods, at meron nagbebenta at may bumibili, umaandar po ang ekonomiya. Pero kung ganito, wala pong umaandar. Puros ang kumikita dyan, yung mga 5-6, yung mga ganyan. Pautang, paggamit ng pera, at yan ang nangyayari. So sabi niya, ang nangyayari dito sa buong mundo, ang may hawak nito, mga ilan-ilan lang mga international banks. Kinakailangan palitan natin yan. Sabi niya, magsama-sama ang bansang China, bansang Russia, bansang India at Amerika para palitan itong sistema at bumalik dun sa sistemang walang floating exchange rate, fixed exchange rate. Noong pong panahon ng 1945 hanggang 1971, ang sistema po natin ay fixed exchange rate. Ibig sabihin, wala pong pwedeng tumaya sa galaw at palitan ng pera. Mas mahusay po yung sistemang yon. Kasi since wala nang tumataya sa Sa palitan, ano nangyayari? Yung perang gusto mong i-invest, pumapasok po sa factories, pumapasok sa industry, pumapasok po sa agribusiness. Ang tayo po nitong sistemang to, yung fixed exchange rate, nung buhay pa siya, was a great man. His name is Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Yan pong picture na nakikita nyo dyan. Si Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a president during the war, and he was re-elected 4 times. When he got into the United States presidency, the U.S. was coming from the Great Depression. Yung Great Depression po sa Amerika, 50% unemployed ang mga tao. Yung mga tao po namamatay sa kalye sa gutom. At yung mga iba nagpapakamatay, tumatalon sa mga building. Yung po yung panahon nung pagpasok ni Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Ang ginawa niya po, tinanggal niya itong pag-i-invest dito sa Wall Street at pinasukan niya itong tamang sistema at binuhay niya ang ekonomiya niya na walang palitan sa pera at naka-fix ang interes ng uutangin para nagkaroon ng kakayanan ang mga negosyo. Pumasok sa negosyo, nakahiram sila at napaandar po ang ekonomiya ng Amerika. That was 1933. At dahil dito, lumakas po yung ekonomiya ng Amerika at nagkaroon ng kakayanan. Siya lang ang nagkaroon ng kakayanan. Pigilin ang pag-advance nitong si Adolf Hitler ng Germany. Anyway, huwag tayo masyadong ma-digress, hindi tayo masyadong lilihis dito sa ating conference. Pero yan pong nakita nyo, kung medyo masilimut, pilitan nyo po, kakayanin nyo rin maintindihan yan. Napakasimple lang po pag naintindihan nyo na. No? Okay, ang next ang keynote speaker dito sa conference na ito ay walang iba kundi si Helga Zepp LaRouche. Siya po yung asawa ni Lyndon LaRouche. Si Lyndon LaRouche, again, namatay na last year. No? At ang naging parang active head dito ay isang napakatalino din tao. Sa akin po, nakilala ko na itong mga to. I had several meetings with them, personal meetings with them in the United States. Si Helga tsaka si Lyndon LaRouche. Sa akin pong palagay, wala pong pag-aano dito. Sila na po palagay ko ang pinakamatalinong 2 taong nakilala ko. Lalong-lalo na po si Lyndon LaRouche. Wala akong duda na itong si Lyndon LaRouche ay magiging isang historical figure. Nandun sa level nila Albert Einstein, sa level nila magagaling mga philosophers, nila Plato, nila Nicholas of Cusa, at iba pang mga dalubhasang tao. One day, maybe it might be soon or a little later, but people will know of Lyndon LaRouche. Okay, I'll go back to our technician to ask him to bring out our tape on Helga Zepp LaRouche, because she was the keynote speaker of the conference which started today, which is, by the way, ongoing for another day as we speak.
I'm greeting all of you who are watching this internet conference from all over the world. And I think you are all aware that the human species right now is confronted with an unprecedented crisis, which not only threatens the cost of many millions of people through illness and hunger, to sweep away many of the institutions which people thought to be granted until now, and to throw large parts of the world into a new dark age, including culturally, but it also can lead to a thermonuclear war that could potentially wipe out all of humanity. This crisis is far more reaching than the 14th century, when the plague wiped out 1/3 of the people from India to Iceland. It is more serious than the Great Depression of the 1930s, because it could potentially destroy more economic substance. And if war breaks out, it will be definitely more consequential than the wars of the 20th century, because in all likelihood, if it breaks out, it would involve nuclear weapons. Due to globalization and the internationalization of many systems, including the internet, nuclear weapons, we are all sitting in one boat. And unlike in previous epochs, when one part of the planet was prospering and another one was collapsing, this time there will be no partial solution. More than ever before in our history, we as a community, as one mankind, are challenged to agree on new principles that can guarantee the long-term fitness of mankind to survive. This is the point of this conference. How can we identify the causes of this crisis, eliminate them, and open a new chapter in universal history that leads our existence out of geopolitical confrontation into an atmosphere of a level of reason that befits the identity of mankind as a creative species? Some people may wonder why, in the middle of a pandemic and the financial crisis, I'm also bringing up the question and the danger of nuclear war. Because the outrageous and malicious attacks and accusations against China made by the British Secret Service MI5 and MI6 and their propaganda outfits, the Henry Jackson Society of London, the Atlantic Council, and the various cluster agents on both sides of the Atlantic, blaming China for the COVID-19 pandemic because it supposedly either delayed the information about it or even used biological warfare against the West. This comes down to an outward building of an enemy image for war. The insolence with which the Henry Jackson Society, the hardcore of the liberal neocons and the British War Party on both sides of the Atlantic, is demanding billions of dollars in compensation can only be seen as a provocation designed to prepare the ground for a strategic showdown. That is the hysterical but ultimately desperate reaction of an empire that realizes that it's all over, and that the world will never again return to the already unraveling strategic orientation of an unipolar world, the so-called Washington Consensus and the, quote, rules-based order that it was able to maintain, at least as a facade, until the outbreak of COVID-19. The calculations of the War Party were wrong. It hastily declared the end of history following the collapse of the Soviet Union, which was also linked to the illusion that China had only to be given membership in the WTO in order to automatically develop into a British-style liberal democracy, and that all other countries would be transformed into Western democracies via regime change policy, either through color revolution or interventionist wars. China's unique world historical cultural achievement, that of not only lifting 850 million of its own people out of poverty, but also for the first time giving developing countries with the new Silk Road a perspective to overcome colonial policy and which is still implemented to this day by the IMF, as well as the poverty it caused, was met with disbelieving horror by the various mouthpieces of the British Empire. After the Western media had ignored the largest infrastructure in history for about 4 years, attacks on so-called autocratic regimes like Russia, China, and others were suddenly escalated by the same media which have profiled themselves since 2015 in the witch hunt against President Trump in collusion with the coup attempt of the British Secret Service. But once the figures were released in March and April showed that China had not only been able to crush the pandemic more effectively, but also overcome the economic consequences of the crisis much more easily than the Western countries, which the privatization of the health sector had left totally unprepared for the pandemic, the tone towards China became very shrill. The rules-based order of Western democracies, the only, quote, democratic legitimacy, has been shaken for a long time, and it now threatens to collapse while Beijing is pursuing a strategy of unrestricted warfare, it was claimed. The fact of the matter is that the liberal system of the British Empire has failed with a bang. But that does not mean that the forces allied with the empire cannot still inflict enormous damage in their agony, for example, by instigating a world war. It is high time to rectify the names, as Confucius would say. If the idea is to draw up a list of guilty parties and compensation due for the current crisis, then it has to be the list of the effects of British liberalism, whose protagonist, Winston Churchill, carries the main responsibility for the lack of the most important aspect of the post-war Bretton Woods system that Franklin D. Roosevelt had intended, namely a credit mechanism for the overcoming of colonialism and the industrialization of the developing sector. Because of this lack, the British Empire's control over the so-called Third World was perpetuated in the post-war period. The situation was then exacerbated after President Nixon terminated the Bretton Woods system in August 1971, which led to the successive deregulation of the financial markets, the infamous outsourcing of cheap labor into cheap labor countries, and IMF conditionalities. The one and only purpose of this policy was to maintain colonial looting and prevent any serious development in those countries. How could anyone in the so-called advanced countries, and we now see with the coronavirus pandemic how advanced they are, assume for even 1 minute that the brutal poverty in Africa, Latin America, and some Asian countries is self-evident or self-inflicted? If the West had done for the last 70 years what China has been doing in Africa since the 60s, but especially in the last 10 years, namely building railways, dams, power plants, and industrial parks, then all of Africa would enjoy the level of development which you see today in South Korea or Singapore, or even better. Africa, as a result of these policies, has virtually no health system, no infrastructure. Half of the population does not have access to fresh water or sanitation or electricity because the British Empire deliberately suppressed them. Working through the IMF and the World Bank, through the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund, which considers the protection of insect species in cases of doubt as more important than the lives of millions of people. If you take into account the overall effect of these policies, you will come up with a figure of millions of people whose life has been shortened by hunger and untreated diseases. Contrary to the myth that the British Empire ceased to exist once and for all with the independence of the colonies and the handover ceremony of Hong Kong on June 30, 1997, it still exists in the form of a neoliberal monetarist control of the world financial system, a control that has always been the quintessence of empires. Another example of pure propaganda from the empire is to say that third world countries simply don't want to develop. The reality is that the concept of the UN development decades was de facto eliminated with the end of Bretton Woods and its replacement by the idea of population reduction, the Club of Rome's crude ideas of the supposed limits to growth, the misanthropic notions of John D. Rockefeller III, as he presented them at the UN Population Conference in Bucharest in 1974, or Henry Kissinger's scandalous NSM 200 from the same year, which were just vapid mouths of the assertion of the evil Pastor Malthus, the scribbler of the British East India Company, who in turn plagiarized the ideas of the Venetian so-called economist Gianmaria Ortiz. Lyndon LaRouche reacted to this paradigm change when he began in a series of studies in 1973 on the effects of the IMF policy to warn that the growing undernourishment, weakening of the immune system, lack of hygiene would lead to the emergence of global pandemics. After the thousands of speeches and writings by LaRouche, which were circulated in the intervening 5 decades all over 5 continents, no one can say that the current pandemic was not foreseeable, especially since LaRouche's entire life work was dedicated, among other things, to working out development programs that would have exactly prevented that. The fundamental reason why the liberal paradigm and the underlying current transatlantic rule-based order has failed, and why the establishment has proven to be so completely unable to reflect on the reasons for this failure, is linked to the axiomatic basis and generally accepted assumptions of the paradigm's image of man, as well as its concept of state and science. After the initial emergence during the Italian Renaissance of ideas of a form of state that consciously fostered the creative capacities of a growing proportion of the population, and the role of scientific progress as a source of social wealth, the feudal oligarchy of the then leading empire Venice launched a deliberately counter-offensive in which Paolo Sarpi, as the leading thinker of the Venetian oligarchy, put forward his teachings, out of which the Enlightenment and liberalism ultimately developed. The idea was to control the scientific debate, but to deny the ability to know and to discover real universal principles, to suppress the Promethean potential by force if need be, to reduce people to the level of sensual experience, and to turn the backwardness of human nature into a dogma. From this tradition came the mechanistic scientific tradition of Galileo and Isaac Newton, the game and information theory of John von Neumann and Norbert Wiener, and more recently, the algorithms that underlie the derivative trading of today's casino economy. The empirical and materialistic dogma and decadent image of man peddled by Thomas Hobbes, Thomas Malthus, Jeremy Bentham, John Locke, and John Stuart Mill, to this day are the basis of British liberalism and the virus, which has contributed more to the current state of the world than anything else. The oligarchical mindset of the British Empire, which denies all men but especially colored men, the divine spark of creativity is expressed in full clarity in numerous writings and statements if people only care to look for them. From Prince Philip's notorious wish to be reincarnated as a deadly virus in order to help reduce the world population of the human race, or the despicable outlook expressed by Adam Smith in his 1959 theory of moral sentiments. Quote, "The administration of the great system of the universe, the care of universal happiness, of rational and sensible things, is the business of God, and not of man. To man is allotted a much more humble department, but one more suitable for the weakness of his powers and to the narrowness of his comprehension. There are of his own happiness, of that of his family, his friends, his country. Nature has directed us to the greater part by these original and initial instincts: hunger, thirst, the passion which unites the sexes, the love of pleasure and the dread of pain, prompt us to apply those means by their own sakes without any consideration of their tendency to those beneficent ends which the great director of nature intended to produce by them." Well, since these attributes are all equally applicable to animals, then it is obviously okay to cull the herd periodically, such as the Spartans killed the helots when they thought they were becoming too numerous. This misanthropic image of man is amplified by pure racism, as Bertrand Russell expressed it so unashamedly in The Prospects of Industrial Civilization. Quote, "The white population of the world will soon cease to increase. The Asiatic races will be longer, and the Negroes still longer, before their birth rate falls sufficiently to make their numbers stable without the help of war and pestilence. Until that happens, the benefits aimed at by socialism can only be partially realized, and the less prolific races will have to defend themselves against the more prolific ones by methods which are disgusting, even if they are necessary." It is precisely this racist ideology which was the justification for colonialism, the slave trade, the opium wars, and, to be honest, it is ultimately also the reason for the monumental indifference shown by large parts of the population in the West when they hear the news about the new locust plague in Africa and in some Asian countries, which could have been eliminated with only $75 million 2 months ago. And nothing has changed in the fundamental support for eugenics among representatives of this empire. That was emphasized once again by the columnist of the Daily Telegraph early March by Jeremy Warner. Quote, "Not to put too fine a point on it, from an entirely disinterested economic perspective, the COVID-19 might even prove mildly beneficial in the long term by disproportionately culling elderly dependents." So it is this barbaric premises of the liberal dogma, also it is hardly fashionable to admit their existence in the so-called developing countries, that led Lyndon LaRouche many years ago to stipulate that the combination of the four powers, economically, the economic and militarily most powerful countries in the world, the United States, Russia, China, and India, was required to carry out the urgently needed reorganization of the world order. This reorganization, however, must begin with the explicit and definite rejection of the image of man of the liberal dogma and its political implications. The British Empire in all of its forms, but above all in its control over the financial system, must be ended. These four powers, the United States, Russia, China, India urgently need to convene in an emergency session and adopt a new Bretton Woods system that realizes FDR's full intention by creating a credit system that guarantees once and for all the industrialization of the developing sector. It should begin with the implementation of a World Health System that builds up a health system in every single country of the planet. First, with a crash program to fight the coronavirus pandemic, then by reaching very quickly the same standards as they used to be the case for the Hill-Burton Act in the United States, or as it was the health standard in Germany and France before the privatization in the 70s. As Roosevelt put it in his speech in the State of the Union in 1941, in the famous Declaration of the Four Freedoms, where he stated, "The third freedom is the freedom from want," which translates into world terms, means economic understanding which secured to every nation a healthy peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt made it her personal mission to ensure that these four freedoms were incorporated into the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In Lyndon LaRouche's draft memorandum of agreement between the US and the USSR in 1984 that defined the principles and the basis of the Strategic Defense Initiative, which he had proposed and which was declared to be the official policy of the United States by President Reagan on March 23 in 1983, which was repeatedly offered to the Soviet Union to cooperate on a comprehensive nuclear disarmament program. He defined the conviction that represents an absolute crucial aspect of his life's work and the mission of this organization. The first article of this paper, the principles of which also apply to the cooperation among the four nations and all others who choose to join this new partnership states. The political foundation for a durable peace must be an unconditional sovereignty of each and all nation states. B, a cooperation among nation states to the effect of promoting unlimited opportunities to participate in the benefits of technological progress, to the mutual benefit of each and all. The most crucial feature of the present implementation of such a policy of durable peace is a profound change in the monetary, economic, and political relations between the dominant powers and those relatively subordinated nations often classified as the developing nations. Unless the inequities lingering in the aftermath of modern colonialism are progressively remedied, there can be no durable peace on this planet. Insofar as the United States and the Soviet Union acknowledge the progress of the productive powers of labor throughout the planet to be the vital strategic interest of each and both, the two powers are bound to that degree and in that way by a common interest. This is the kernel of the political and economic policies of practice indispensable to the fostering of durable peace between those two powers. In view of the escalation of the anti-China campaign launched by British intelligence, which has people in President Trump's entourage attempting to outdo each other almost hourly in their accusations against China, including Secretary of State Pompeo, Peter Navarro, Lindsey Graham, Tucker Carlson, while various demonstrations of show of force by the United States and NATO forces appear to be limited only by the number of COVID infections among some of their crews, this existential question is posed: of how the world can get out of this dangerous escalation. Are we doomed to relive how the overtaking of the ruling power by the second most powerful leads to war, as it already happened in history 12 times? The combination of the corona pandemic, the world hunger crisis, the impending financial hyperinflationary blowout, and the depression of the global real economy is so overwhelming that it should be clear to every thinking human being that mankind can get out of this crisis only if the economic potential of the United States and China, supported by other industrial countries, is jointly deployed and increased in order to create the capacities needed to ensure the medical care, infrastructure, and industrial and food production. It is in the existential interest of every individual and every nation on this planet to work towards this goal. We have to create a worldwide chorus among nations and many millions of people to demand just that. The conflict between the United States and China only exists if those forces in both parties in the United States prevail that are in the tradition of H.G. Wells' open conspiracy, with the idea that if the United States accepts the model of the British Empire as the basis of the Anglo-American controlled unipolar order, they can run the world. This vision by H.G. Wells was carried on by William Yandell Elliott, the mentor of Kissinger, Brzezinski, Samuel Huntington, up to the neocons of the Project for a New American Century, the PNAC. If, on the other hand, the United States harks back to the true tradition of the Declaration of Independence against the British Empire and of the American system of economics of Alexander Hamilton, then there will be a great affinity with China's economic model, which contains many of the principles of Alexander Hamilton, Friedrich List, Henry C. Carey. In the same way, the father of modern China, Sun Yat-sen, was very much influenced by the American system. At the Urgent Emergency Summit of the United States, China, and Russia and India, and then the immediate necessary founding conference of the new Bretton Woods system, the heads of state can take up on the spirit of the original Bretton Woods conference, at which the head of the Chinese delegation, H.H. Kung, submitted Sun Yat-sen's proposal for an international development organization. Kung, one of Sun Yat-sen's brothers-in-law, said in his speech in Bretton Woods, China is looking to a period of great economic development and expansion after the war. This includes a program of large-scale industrialization besides the development and modernization of agriculture. It is my firm conviction that an economically strong China is an indispensable condition to the maintenance of peace and the improvement of the well-being of the world. After the First World War, Dr. Sun Yat-sen proposed a plan for what he termed the international development of China. He emphasized the principle of cooperation with friendly nations and utilization of foreign capital for the development of China's resources. Dr. Sun's teaching constituted the basis of China's national policy. America and others of the United Nations, I hope, will take an active part in aiding the post-war development of China. As I said, Roosevelt supported the internationalization of this development policy throughout the negotiations. And he considered the increase of a high standard of living worldwide as the key to global stability. And he saw the way to do this in the internationalization of the New Deal policy. The four main nations of the world, US, China, Russia, and India, must now establish a new Bretton Woods system, and together with all nations that wish to join, a new paradigm in international cooperation among nations that is guided by the common aims of mankind. The fourth of Lyndon LaRouche's 4 laws defines the qualitatively higher economic platform, the higher level of reason, of coincidentia oppositorum of Nicolaus of Cusa, on which the contradictions of geopolitical confrontation will be overcome. International cooperation among scientists who rely exclusively on verifiably universal principles must replace the primacy of politics based on ideology and interest. Research into the life sciences, a better understanding of what causes the characteristics of life and its origins in the universe, is the prerequisite for the fight against the coronavirus and all other potential virological, bacterial, and other disease processes. As part of a World Health System, we need to build up collaborative medical research centers internationally, where the young scientists of all developing countries will also be trained. The profound experience of the coronavirus pandemic is that the provision of health care must be a common good and not serve to maximize the profit of private interests. The results of this research must therefore be immediately provided to all universities, hospitals, and medical personnel in all nations. Another area in which the international cooperation towards the common goals of mankind is indispensable is the achievement of energy and raw material security, for which will be possible with the mastery of thermonuclear fusion and the associated fusion torch process. The international ITER project in Cadarache in the south of France, a tokamak nuclear fusion reactor and international research project, already involving the cooperation of 34 nations, is a good start. But the funding of ITER and other models of nuclear fusion must be massively increased. One of the LaRouche's central discoveries is the interconnection between the energy population density and the energy flux density in the production process used. Therefore, the mastery of nuclear fusion is imperative also not only for the population living, but especially for manned space flight. Space research is itself one area which would be unthinkable without international cooperation, in which more than any other branch of science demonstrates in a positive way what the pandemic demonstrates negatively, that we are actually the one species that is determined by its future and whose long-term survivability will depend on our learning to better understand and master the laws of the universe, including at least 2 trillion galaxies that the Hubble telescope has been able to verify. Defense against asteroids, meteors, and comets is only one among the many important elements of this. For developing countries, the unlimited participation in research projects is the best way through scientific and technological leapfrogging to create the precondition for economies that are able to provide all citizens with a good and safe life. Nicolaus of Cusa already wrote back in the 15th century that all discoveries in science should be immediately made available to the representatives of all countries in order to not hold back unnecessarily their development. He also found that the concordance in the macrocosm is only possible when all microcosms develop in the best possible way. The new paradigm that we need to shape for cooperation among all nations must start from the common interest of all mankind, towards the realization of which all nations and cultures in counterpoint, as it were, as in a fugue, are intertwined and rise dynamically to higher stages of anti-entropic development. Are we, as a human civilization, able at this late stage of events to avert the tsunami of pandemics, famine, financial crisis, depression, and a new world war. Then the world needs this summit of the four nations now. If such a summit were to announce all these changes, a new Bretton Woods system, the four powers joining hands in building up a global development program in the form of the new Silk Road becomes the World Land Bridge, a World Health System, an international crash program in fusion and related research, a massive upgrade in international space cooperation, and last but not least, a dialogue of the classical traditions of all nations with the aim of sparking a new renaissance of classical culture in a similar but even more beautiful way than the great Italian Renaissance overcame the horrors of the Dark Age of the 14th century. Then a new era of civilization can be born. Is there reasonable hope that we can overcome the current profound crisis of mankind? I would say absolutely. We are the only creative species known in the universe so far, which has the ability to discover new principles of our universe again and again, which implies that there is an affinity between our creative mental processes to these physical laws. One thought that elucidates this optimistic perspective concerns one aspect of space research, namely the seemingly accelerated process of aging in the condition of weightlessness and the change of this process in hypergravity. A better understanding of this space gerontology is obviously crucial for the future of manned space travel to Mars and in interstellar space travel, as it is expected that this will significantly increase the ability of humans to have a longer, healthy life. If you consider that Schubert only lived to be 31, Mozart 35 years, Dante 36, Schiller 45, Shakespeare 52, and Beethoven only 56 years, then you have an idea how much the geniuses of the future, with a life expectancy of 120 or 150 years, will be able to contribute to mankind's development. Therefore, join us in putting an end to the British Empire, and let's create a truly human future for all of mankind. Thank you.
Okay, napakinggan niyo po, walang iba kundi si Helga Zepp-LaRouche. For the information of everybody, si Helga Zepp-LaRouche, siguro she has already called us about 3 or 4 times as our guest in ang Ating Katipunan. I was able to interview her that number of times on various topics over the years. At si Mr. Lyndon LaRouche mismo, has joined us maybe 2 or 3 times when it was very critical that we wanted to understand what was going on in our country. And he had a lot to say and a lot to praise the Filipino people as to the kind of, as to the quality of the Filipino character and culture. He says that we have a big role to play because we are precisely the gateway of Roman European culture, the best of European culture, into the Asian culture, and the best of Asian culture going into the Western culture. Tayo po, geographically, are precisely placed in that role. Yun po. But marami pong nasabi ngayon sa atin si Helga Zepp-LaRouche. And I will not go deep into whatever she has already said, pero nakikita niyo po the kind of thinking that we need to have in order to address this major problem. But Helga also touched on certain elements that are trying to destroy man, that are trying to destroy this kind of move, of collaborative move by different nations and different people in order to address both the economic and the health crisis that is unprecedented facing the world today. Meron pong mga tao na nagsumisira dyan, particularly those kasi nakikita nila na itong China, medyo umaangat ang China at nagbibigay ng proposal dito sa Belt and Road Initiative. It is the only one of its kind historically of its magnitude. Ito pong global infrastructure project ng Belt and Road Initiative. You must remember, the Belt and Road Initiative proposes to be able to connect all the 7 continents by land using high-tech travel systems and cargo systems. High-tech po, and that means these are all fast rail systems not going lower than 500 kilometers per hour and going as fast as 1,000 to 1,500 kilometers per hour. Ganito po yan. And there are already 150 countries that are signed up to this project, including our own, the Philippines. As we speak, there are already in the initial stages and in different areas of the world that these railway systems are being made. A lot of it, of course, marami pong nag-uumpisa na ngayon sa Africa, buti na lang, no? At meron din po sa Iran, meron din po sa Russia, and meron din po dito sa Asia and a little of Southeast Asia, no? Now, the proposal is 150 countries, more than that, working together to fix up the financial system and the world economic order. Tapos, magkakaroon tayo ng global infrastructure project that will boost the economic capabilities and commerce between all countries. Ang alternative po dito ay kaguluhan, no? Katulad po nitong sitwasyon, ang sinasabi ni Helga, na meron pong malaking effort on the part of certain sectors to demonize China. There is a big effort to make it look like everything, for example, like they want to be able to blame the coronavirus on China. They want to be able to say that China has been very secretive and malicious about the results of. But alam niyo po, the biggest contributor of medical equipment and expertise right now all over the world. The biggest by far among to all other countries, including the United States. The biggest donor is China. And yet, there are people trying to demonize them, saying what China says. Now, dito po sa atin, nakikita nyo na po yan. Hanggang ngayon po, marami tayong naririnig-rinig dyan. Minumura ang China, tapos tinatakot tayo, parang sinasabi, ayan na, mag-i-invade na ang China sa inyo, o sa atin, at kailangan pigilin natin, kailangan gumawa tayo ng paraan para gerahin natin o labanan natin yung mga ganyan. There are people trying to demonize China. Siyempre, we know where these guys are coming from. They're coming from what we now know to be the CIA, the deep state, and so on and so forth. Buti na lang si President Trump ay kakaiba dito sa CIA niya. Kanya nga may problema si President Trump because itong mga taong ito sa gobyerno niya may tangka sa kanyang buhay. Dito din naman sa Pilipinas, itong mga CIA at itong mga meron din silang tangka sa buhay ng ating presidente. Bakit po? Kasi ayaw pumayag ng presidente na gagawin launching pad ang Pilipinas laban po sa China. Meron po akong sinabi na hambing dito sa kinikwento ko sa inyo, dito sa conference na ito. At we will play it now.
Greetings from the Philippine LaRouche Society. Thank you for allowing us to share our insights as to how we find ourselves playing a significant role in the global peace effort. For most of us, observant with both international and local affairs, the past decade has been most foreboding, causing heightened apprehension due to increased tensions among the superpowers. The overthrow of the 2012 Ukraine leadership by, admittedly, the CIA, and the subsequent encirclement of Russia and China by Obama's Asian pivot were major steps being taken by the Western allies, asserting military dominance over those who dare to defy them. At about the same period, the destruction of Syria, care of the manufactured ISIS and mercenary terrorists used in the overthrow of Libya's Gaddafi, was in full operation, intending to take out President Assad to replace him with a puppet government. But they did not expect President Putin of Russia and President Xi Jinping of China to collaborate in deterring effectively the British and Obama move to fast-track the world into a war. And just to move quickly forward, neither did they expect a leader of a client state or a better description is a compliant state, to be thrust into the presidency of our republic by an overwhelming majority. Duterte made no promises except to fight terrorism and do battle with the drug syndicates. Even if his vocabulary needed some refining, his admirers readily tolerated the expletives because he epitomized the anger long suppressed by the alliance of falsely elected government officials and the oligarchic corporations, causing desperate conditions of life. Yet nothing has so unified the country more than the incident where shortly after his election, even before his inauguration, Obama gives him a call to remind him of the obligations that the previous corrupt government had made with him regarding the Visiting Forces Agreement and the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Act, virtually establishing the Philippines as the most proximate U.S. military base facing China, and consequently its nearest target in case of a nuclear confrontation between the two powers. What seemed to get Duterte more incensed, aside from the condescending tone of Obama, was the threat that unless our president submits to these dictates, he will withdraw a $700 million assistance earmarked by the USA for the Philippines. Duterte retorted by saying he can keep his money and go to hell. We are no longer your colony. I believe many Filipinos got enamored to the newly elected leader after this, until this day, 4 years into a 6-year term, he still enjoys an 87% popularity and approval rating. For once over so many decades, including the administration of Marcos and those before him, the Filipino people felt like a truly sovereign nation. Inevitably, this strained relationship brought us closer to Russia and China, yet a subsequent improved relations with the U.S. upon the election of another phenomenal leader, President Donald Trump. It's worth noting that whether President Duterte knew the implications of what he did when he asserted our independence, we in the Philippine LaRouche Society could not resist but to voice out to constituents and friends in government our approval of these events. Immediately, we knew that the Philippines was going to play a key role in establishing peace in the Southeast Asian region. But so too did the surrogates of the CIA, George Soros, and Deep State, or whatever the names they are called. They went into a relentless campaign to disparage the president, using the mercenary opposition and mainstream media, and accusing Duterte as a China puppet, who will place the country into the debt trap, conveniently ignoring the fact that we have been in one for the past 4 decades, courtesy of the IMF and the world's money lenders. The demonization of China has been well orchestrated, ironically including the so-called leftist elements whose former battle cry was to put down American imperialism, are now massively demonstrating against the expansion plans of China and her intentions to attack and occupy the Philippines, now calling on their American imperialists to protect poor Filipino fishermen. Despite all this geopolitics being played by characters associated with the financial oligarchy, manipulators of Wall Street, politicians, and a host of other British agents, we observe that Trump is standing his ground not to be lured into intrigues concocted by people in his cabinet, mainstream media, on China's and Russia's intentions towards the United States. It is obvious by his confident demeanor that his relationship with Putin and Xi Jinping is far from being antagonistic, which bodes well for the whole world. But we all know that matters have taken a very sharp turn for the worse recently. The pandemic will not spare the Philippines and many third world countries similarly situated. The resulting economic conditions will turn from bad to worse for all countries. It is not good for the world's population, but definitely a boost for the intentions of those who want it destroyed. If not for the China's Belt and Road Initiative, started in 2014, the Global Infrastructure Program historically the greatest project ever conceived by man for mankind, linking all 7 continents by land via high-tech transport systems. Now with 150 registered nations willing to join, there will be no alternative project of its magnitude that can match the staggering effort being undertaken by those who, like the mythical god Zeus, will destroy the mortals. These mortals, who in a short 30 years have risen from decrepit conditions to becoming the second largest economy in the world, a people with the most extensive railway system, doubling that of the world's combined, a country which has started to help develop the African continent, the most exploited people in the planet, constructing a railway from South Africa to Egypt covering 9,000 miles, roughly 3 times the length from New York to California, a country which has brought its whole population of 1.4 billion above the poverty level. They did not do it by occupying other countries, nor did they intimidate others to buy their goods or control their currencies, and establish a 600 military bases all over the world to enforce their will over others. They did the way other great thinkers and leaders would have done it. Alexander Hamilton, Benjamin Franklin, Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, and Lyndon LaRouche. There is a saying that a tree that bears much fruit will attract those who will throw stones at it. The US and other countries have 2 options. One is to join those whose vision of the world is based on geopolitics, in which they stupidly take sides and ally themselves with whomever they consider to possess greater military might, in anticipation of a world nuclear conflict, or collaborate with China, Russia, India, and over 100 other countries, the Philippines included, in a global collective effort to stem the devastating effects of an ongoing collapse of the world financial system, in confluence with a pandemic which threatens human population with millions of deaths. In a real sense, the world's faith and 8 billion lives lies in the hands of one Donald Trump. His decision time is running short because the enemies of mankind are on a massive effort to stop him from doing what is right. We in the Philippines will do what we can to influence our decision makers, not to fall into the China demonization trap. We are confident that the local opposition and the leftist elements have not been able to convince our people that China has taken control of the Philippines. On the contrary, it's the US naval assets which are sailing and docking in our ports, needing no permission to do so. Just as Trump is the principal obstacle to World War III, Duterte's presence is a deterrent to the deep state to use us as a launching pad for a preemptive strike against China. It is certain that both these leaders are among the top in their demonic list. We join Helga Zepp LaRouche, the whole LaRouche movement, friends, and the rest of the world in making this clarion call for all to hear that where there is great crisis, there is great opportunity to make the necessary changes for our civilization to succeed. It is our duty as human beings to be worthy of the creative powers given to us by our Creator. We in the Philippines commit to do our part in a true agapic spirit to save humankind from self-destruction in the name of truth, justice, peace, and development. So help us God. Thank you.
Yan po yung huling section. Ang ginawa ko po ay ilabas ko na dito ang lalabas dun sa conference, no? Yung ating pong statement hinggil dito sa sitwasyon natin sa Pilipinas at ang mga kalaban ng world peace. Ang kalaban po ng world peace ay walang iba kundi yung mga gustong gawin magkagera, gusto nilang magkaroon ng labanan. Itong mga tao na nakatali dito sa concept ng geopolitics. Geopolitics is nothing but making you favor one against the other, and then you will favor the so-called stronger one versus the other. And this is what has been happening for so many decades dito po sa atin. But look what had happened. Nothing came out of that geopolitics. Our economy, world economy, has gone down, and we have been susceptible to now pandemics. No? If you look at yourself and your family, and understand that you did not take care of your family's care in terms of getting strong, taking vitamins, and providing for your family, it's in terms of the resources. Anong mangyayari? You become susceptible. And then pag tinamaan tayo ng bagyo o ng delubyo, babagsak tayo. Tapos magkakaroon po ng sitwasyon na may lockdown, wala tayong kikitain, wala tayong ngayon mapakain. No? The other thing, dahil hindi natin inalagaan, naging susceptible tayo sa sakit. At yun po ang nangyari, hindi lang po sa isang pamilya, kundi sa buong mundo. At ngayon, dahil dito sa pangyayaring ito, pabagsak na yung sistemang pananalapi. We are now facing the economy of the world will never be the same. Don't think about going back to so-called normal. The oil prices, as you know, are almost negative now. No? Negative kasi wala na pong gumagana ng mga negosyo at industriya, hindi na nila kinakailangan ng langis, kanya wala ng demand sa langis. Produce ng langis, hindi na nila alam kung saan ilalagay. Ang ginagawa nila, binabayaran na lang nila yung mga tanker para mag-ipon ng langis doon. So nagiging negative na yung price ng langis. It will not be the same. What we can do is join up with this concept, as Helga was saying, is to move this, participate in this four-country proposal, wherein China, Russia, US, India will get together and come up with a new Bretton Woods economic order. A new order which is going to veer away from money speculation. It's going to veer away, and the main objective will be the improvement of the life of every single human being on this planet. Sovereign nation states getting together with one common objective for the upliftment of humankind. Pwede po natin gawin yan. At nandito na po tayo sa ganitong sitwasyon, and it will be a great opportunity to go there. The alternative is war. I don't have to spell it out to you. I don't have to, the alternative is war. Let us not get misled by all kinds of propaganda, pro this and pro that. anti-Trump, pro-Trump, and all of that. And then this news coming from so-and-so, and this expert saying this. The bottom line is the world is in a crisis. That's the bottom line. How do you solve it? The world must solve it. We cannot solve it alone. Japan cannot do it. US cannot do it alone. But a group of countries can do it alone. Why do we talk about these 4 countries to take the lead in changing the world economic order from what it was before, from a casino type of investments before, to something that is moving towards higher level of production for all economies? Why do we talk about the 4? Because China, Russia, India, and the US are the most powerful and the biggest economies right now in the world. Not only that those 4 countries comprise more than almost half of the world's population. And if these leaders get their minds together to try to save humanity, then we have a chance. On the other hand, if we stop of blaming China about this and blaming somebody about this, that is very quickly going to move into a conflict. And the conflict may very quickly escalate into a nuclear conflict, something that none of us should want. No one in his right mind will want. Even the older ones, kasi sabi, hindi bali, mamatay na ako, matanda na ako. Hindi po. Huwag nyo namang gawin yan kasi meron pa kayong mga apo, meron pa kayong mga anak, at meron pa silang opportunity to live. No? Ba't po natin gagawin yan? So we must look for the solutions. At bago pong natin tapusin, meron po tayong ibang mga messages.
Yeah, well, we have about 5 minutes left, so.
Okay.
We'll get one. This is interesting. I think you already addressed the issue of Trump and other things, in China, anti-China. From Falling Rain, good PM, Sir Butch, tama ba na umutang tayo sa ADB at World Bank? At ano po ang reaksyon niyo tungkol sa 80% ratings ng government ratings as to their response to the COVID? So 2 parts yung question.
Alam niyo po, yung pag-uutang sa ADB tsaka sa World Bank, hindi po kailangan yan. Nakakainis nga po bakit doon tayo pupunta para umutang. Mayroon po tayong $88 billion. Ano po ang reaksyon niyo tungkol sa 80% ratings ng... Meron po tayong $88 billion na nasa Central Bank as an emergency fund. Maski porsyento lang ang gamitin natin doon, marami na no? Kasi ang inuutang po natin aabot lang sa 50 million, 1 billion or 50 billion pesos. Yung pong 88 billion, mas malaki po ito no? Dollars. 10 billion lang gamitin mo dyan, 500 billion na Nandyan na yan. Isa pa, hindi mo kailangan cash ang itulong mo muna sa tao. Wala ka ng cash, pues sabihin mo, lahat ng mga negosyo at lahat ng tao, wag mo na magbayad ng kuryente at tubig. Wag mo na magbayad. Cash ba yon na ibinigay mo? Wala. Sinong mawawalan dito? Yung mga oligarkong magnanakaw. Hindi ba? So, may utang pa nga yung mga yan sa atin. Sabi ni Duterte noon, 1 trillion pa nga utang ng mga yan sa atin. Hindi ko maintindihan bakit naging tamimi ngayon si Duterte tungkol dito. But nevertheless, if you stop the payment, what happens? that is not inflationary dahil hindi ka nag-emprenta ng pera. Bakit? Kasi pinara mo lang ang pagbabayad. Para ka na lang nagbigay ng pera sa mga mamamayan. Nagkakaroon sila ng greater capacity to purchase goods. Pati na rin yung mga negosyante, at yan ang pinakamalaking gumagamit ng kuryente at tubig. Pag tinanggal mo yan, ang laking nawawala sa kanilang gastos. Tinulungan mo yung mga negosyante at kaya nila ngayon magbaba ng presyo at umandar at magkaroon ng pero wala, it is not inflationary. Why? Because you took away this major burden from the people and from the businesses. That is one way to help our people. If you really are serious in helping us, no? Ito pong 80% approval dahil dito sa... Well, alam niyo po, ang presidente ay presidente. Hindi ko po tatanggalin sa kanya ang kanyang kahirapan dito sa kanyang kinakailangan gawin. At ipit na siya dito sa mga desisyon niya. Ngunit ito po ay pahayag ng mga tao dahil siya ang presidente, malaki ang kanilang inaantabayanan sa kanyang mga desisyon. Pero inaantabayanan po nila, Mr. President, tanggalin mo yung napakabigat na gastos ng kuryente at tubig na pasan ng mga mamamayang Pilipino. Para mo ng awa. Huwag mong papakinggan itong mga economic managers mo na hindi sinasabi ang katotohanan sa iyo. Medyo palihis ang sigurong pagbibigay nila sa iyo ng tamang impormasyon. Marami po tayong makukunan ng pera. Isa pa, yung mga pork barrel ng mga kongresista, pwede ba? Sabihin nyo, huwag munang ibigay ang pork barrel ng mga kongresista at senador. Gamitin natin diretso para sa tao. Kasi yun naman ang sinasabi ng mga kongresista. Para sa tao yan eh. No? Well, let's get it and give it back to them. That's just a few. Meron pa po tayong mga ibang pwedeng gawin. Pero ito lang ang nakainis ko. Ang linalabas ko dito, itong mga advisor ng presidente na bata ng mga oligarko, hindi nila papayagan makatulong ang presidente sa mamamayang Pilipino. Mag-isip-isip na po tayo. Kung itong state of emergency ay hindi sapat para magawa ng presidente ang kanyang pangangailangan para matulungan ng taong bayan, pues, pag-isipan na po natin ang revolutionary government. At itong mga armed forces of the Philippines natin, napalagay ko'y matitino at nakakaintindi po ng sinasabi natin ngayon. Mag-isip po sila. Gawin niyo po itong kinakailangan gawin. Hindi natin kinakailangan magpatayan o magano. Basta maggawa tayo ng pamamaraan para maisalba ang ating mga mamamayan. There are two issues now that are actually one. We have to save the lives of our Filipino people. But the threats to the lives are two. Hindi po one over the other, hindi po ganyan. Sabay po yan. Isa yung sakit, isa yung economics. Hindi po yung papanatan mo yung sakit para malutas yung sakit, sakripisyo muna sa economics. Hindi po. Pwede natin sabay ang solusyon dyan. Nung sinabi nila sa presidente, una muna yung sakit, tsaka na muna yung economics, patay tayo. Kasi baka ang pinapatay natin sa economics ay mas marami pa dun sa mga namamatay sa sakit. It is the quality of thinking that is important. We know that the president's heart is with the people. But we also know that he is somewhat compromised. Medyo may kompromiso po siya. Mga kaibigan niyang mga bilyar, mga oligarko. Yan mga iba pang mga pinaghihingan niya ng tulong, no? Mga oligarko. Pero yung pong tulong na binibigay nila, no, ay kakuranggot lang sa kanilang kinukuha sa ating gobyerno. At ito'y hindi nare-realize ang presidente. Wala ka pong utang sa kanila. Kaibigan mo sila, pues okay. Pero ang utang nyo po, ang tunay na utang nyo po, ay ang mamamayang Pilipino. It is to them that you owe your correct decisions to be made. And if you do not do that, you turn around, talikuran mo yung pinangako mo sa mamamayang Pilipino, Mr. President. Nakakalungkot po. Pero baka hindi po mangyari yung matagal niya nang ginugusto na ipabuti ang buhay ng mamamayang Pilipino. Dahil pinaboran niyo po ang mga oligarko. Yan lang po. Is there other?
It's 9 plus.
Okay, hanggang dyan na lang po tayo sa ating katipunan. Salamat po at sinamahan niyo kami ngayon. At kung gusto niyo pong marinig ang patuloy na komperensya ngayon dito sa International Conference, itong Schiller Institute sponsored conference, you can check it out in larouchepac.com or schillerinstitute.com. SCHILLER Institute, tuloy-tuloy, schillerinstitute.com. At maririnig niyo po dyan yung mga ibang mga speakers, and guaranteed, these are all great speakers and personalities coming from all over the world. So until Tuesday po, sa ating pong isa pang programa, kasama sila RJ at si Toti, ang Talakayan Bayan. Ako po'y nagpapaalam dito sa ating Katipunan. Maraming salamat po.